Hello and welcome everyone. Today's workshop is on the benefits and problems of using technology. And this workshop is one of many that we've done in the series on childhood neurodiversity. So thank you for everyone for coming along today. It is about 1:15, so hopefully we'll be finished about 2:15, or we'll try our best to do so. So this has been prepared by the Psychology in Schools team within the Norfolk and Suffolk Foundation Trust. I'll just introduce myself first. So my name is Dr. Hope Westgate and I'm a clinical psychologist in the team. And to you, Beth.
Hi, I'm Dr. Beth Mosley, consultant clinical psychologist in the team and across a broader service in NSFT.
Thank you. So we'll make a start. So throughout this today, we'll be using a tool called Slido, and we use this in order to interact with you. So we'll ask some questions and you'll be able to answer on that. So this is really, really helpful to use, and lots of people say they get a lot out of using Slidos. But just to say, please do not use any kind of personal sensitive information such as identifying people by their names. So it is set up to be anonymous, so we won't see names, but please don't put them in. And just so you're aware that as you type things in, your answers will come up on the screen. And our workshops are recorded because we do send out recordings afterwards. So you may have been to these workshops before and used Slido, but just for those that haven't, you can join on slido.com. So it can be quite helpful to join on another device. So if you're watching this on the computer, maybe joining on your phone, for example. It's free, no sign up. As you go onto the homepage of slido.com, it asks for the event code. So today's is 3692245. You will be reminded of it as we go through. And it will come up with questions as we go. So this is our first question, just to get people started and get people logging on to Slido. And it's also just helpful for us to kind of identify who's in the audience, really. I know you may have multiple children, but if you think about the child that you've kind of come here in mind with, how old is your child? So we know that there's probably going to be a bit of an age range. And hopefully this will be suitable and something to kind of go home with, whatever age your child is. But so we've got at the moment, we've got about 18, 19 people logged into Slido, and majority at the moment are 6 to 10-year-olds, some 11 to 13, maybe someone 14 to 16-year-old. 20 people on Slido, almost half. Okay, got a few more people logging on, great. So kind of majority of that slightly lower in age range. That's really helpful to know. But yeah, please do log on to Slido if you're not, so we can get kind of the full representation of everyone here. Thank you. Excellent. Okay, go on to the next one. And this is just for us to get a sense of kind of how it's been advertised and where people are from. So we're based in Suffolk, so we often expect most people to say Suffolk, but we know that this can be accessed by anyone in the country or over the world. So maybe elsewhere in the UK, we've got some people. Great. So we've got majority Suffolk at the moment, 65%. Some people elsewhere in the UK, someone from Norfolk as well. I'm always intrigued where the elsewhere in the UK, sorry, not outside the UK, but elsewhere.
Imagine there's a few people from Essex, because I think our workshops are advertised in North East Essex.
Yeah. So I know there's a few more people coming in. If you have just joined, we are using Slido just to do some few initial questions, but we'll be using it as a tool throughout. So you can just log on to slido.com and the event code is at the side. Okay, let's move on. So this workshop is on technology use and in neurodivergent children. So how would you rate your current understanding of technology use in neurodivergent children? So there should be a bit of a poll that's coming up on your Slido. And once a few people have had a chance to do it, when I click, we should be able to see the results. So I'll just go with your gut instinct. Try not to overthink this one. What's your current understanding? Technology use in neurodivergent children. Let's see what people have put. Okay, so there's often a range here. So at the moment, the kind of average score is around 4.7. So yeah, we should say the ends of the scale. So 10 out of 10 would be I kind of know everything, I have all the knowledge, and 1 would be I know nothing at all. So at the moment, we're kind of in the middle there on average, but as we'd expect, there's varied responses. A lot of people kind of saying around 6. Okay, lovely, thank you. Okay, so the next question is slightly different. It's how you'd rate your current confidence supporting your neurodivergent child of technology use. So it is a different question. So the last one was understanding, but this is how confident you feel with supporting your child with using technology. So again, if you just give a rating, 10 out of 10 being kind of fully confident, and we'll see what people have put. Okay, so you can see the scores are a little bit lower, skewed down to the low end this time. On average at the moment around 4.1. Most people kind of responding with a 3, 4.2. Yeah, so maybe that confidence is a little bit lower than understanding, which is quite normal. Sometimes we may know the stuff but actually not feel so confident in utilising it. So that's really helpful. Thank you. So we actually do this poll at the end as well, just to kind of check in with people. So thank you, everyone. So just to cover what we're going to discuss today. So we're going to look at technology use in young people, and particularly neurodivergent young people. And we do have more of a focus on social media, as we know that that's often the concern that parents are raising around use of social media. So the majority is focused on that, but we do kind of talk and look at general technology as well. So we'll be looking at some of the benefits and the problems of social media use. Something that we won't be able to cover in depth today is around body image related to social media, and we do have another workshop related to that. So we'll make sure you have information at the end. And just a reminder that these slides will all be sent as a recording to you as well, so you can kind of look over content that we haven't been able to cover completely. And we'll also talk about, towards the end, what you can do as parents and carers to support your young person. So I'll be going through the first half and Beth will be going through the second half. So social media, what is it? I'm sure many people are familiar with it. Here's the Wikipedia definition. So social medias are interactive technologies that facilitate the creation and sharing of information, ideas, interests, and other forms of expression through virtual communities and networks. So you may think of things like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, but there's many more ones that I don't even know about, but when I start talking to children and young people, I find out some new ones. So it's always best to kind of ask the young people what's the most used social media form at the moment, because what you're using may be different to what your child is using. So just to start things off, thinking about for yourself, what do you find valuable about social media? So kind of thinking about the positives aspects first. And it may be that you use it quite a lot. It may be that you use it only a little bit. It's going to be quite varied. By the way, for these Slidos where there's comments, I will try and summarise and read as much as I can, but I won't necessarily be able to read every comment, and you're not expected to read everything on the screen either. So what are people finding valuable? So there's a lot about connecting, family relationships, communication, and I guess we all do live in different parts of the country often now, so that can be really, yeah, people are saying staying in touch with people, finding specific information, so to kind of gain knowledge. Some people aren't using it so much. Yeah, we've got more about social connections, support groups. We'll talk a little bit about that today. So there can be lots of support and information out there. Keeping in touch with friends, keeping up to date, seeing photos. Yeah, it can be really positive. Being able to kind of look through photos of people you don't get to see often. Local community, yeah, it's a way for kind of communities to gather and share ideas, share events, connections, like-minded people and same interests. It's a really easy way to kind of connect with people who've got a similar interest to you. It can be great for friendships. Lots of people saying catching up with friends, keeping in touch with old friends, even people that you may not message so much anymore. It can be just quite nice to know what's going on in their life. Yeah, we've got similar, so there's kind of themes coming up around friends, community, information, being nosy. I like that one. Yeah, we all like to be nosy every so often. So there's lots of value I can see in social media, and it sounds like a lot of people here do make use of it. Okay, and so the flip side is, what do you find unhelpful or what do you find difficult about social media? And there are often kind of pros and cons. Algorithmic, yeah. So it's very clever, social media, and will pick up on what kind of things you like, what kind of things you don't like, and yeah, it uses lots of algorithms. Trolls, yeah, so trolls and bullying, addictive. I think a lot of people can relate to that. Yeah, and a lot of people are saying addictive. It's very easy to just keep doom scrolling. Someone saying, yeah, just keep on scrolling. Not real. Drama baiting, feeling put down, expectations, and there's a few comments around pressure as well. So yeah, you don't always kind of see the real side of life, and lots of people feel very kind of it can impact self-esteem in some ways. It's pushed ads, disinformation. Yeah, it's really hard to know what's true, what's false. For cyberbullying, it's really important to think about. People kind of can just say things that they wouldn't say to your face, so there's that aspect of it being quite anonymous, which can be helpful in some aspects, and actually in other aspects can be really hard when people say things that they know they wouldn't get away with in real life. People fake news, yeah, as I said, it can be hard to kind of tell the real news from fake news. And in the themes that Slido is pulling up, yeah, it's saying a lot of people are saying it is quite addictive. It can take up a lot of our time, our life. Keyboard warriors, yeah. Just leave with us a couple other people typing. Lack of responsibility from providers, yeah. So there's been a lot about that in the news recently as well, around what is the responsibility, and yeah, some kind of Ofcom getting involved, only highlighting the positive, alternatively all the horrible things in the world. Yeah, so it can be quite skewed. Sometimes you're just seeing kind of lots of people getting on really well, and sometimes actually being flooded with all negative news. So yeah, and you can see that lots of you are saying similar things. Thank you. That's just for you to get thinking at the start of this. So obviously we are here today to think about your child and their use. And there's been lots of surveys on this, and it's changing year on year. So the picture on the left-hand side was a survey done in the US in 2023 that looked at teenagers' use of technology. So you can see that YouTube was the most popular, and then TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, and Facebook. But you can see that people are using these, often daily, and actually quite a large proportion of people saying they're almost constantly using things like TikTok and YouTube. So you can see that kind of addictive element. And again, the picture on the right-hand side, that was a survey conducted by Ofcom in 2022. Similar findings, YouTube very high up there, and WhatsApp as well. So it's a very big part of everyday life for all of us now, but particularly our children. And it may be quite different to when you were growing up. So children at the moment, they are born into this world where social media is very accessible, very available, and everyone's using it. So we really need to kind of understand technology uses and what are the benefits and costs and how we can support people, because young people particularly are logging on to these things every day. And there was an interesting survey in 2024, so this year, very recent, that Ofcom did, that actually said that 6 in 10 8 to 17-year-olds have multiple profiles on at least one social media platform. So 23% said one account was just for parents and families to see. A similar proportion said one account was just for close friends and the other was for everyone else. And 13% said one is for the real me and another contained edited posts or videos or filtered out. So that may not be something you've even considered about kind of using multiple profiles for different people. So it's really helpful just to be aware of these things. So throughout this, we are kind of drawing on lots of studies because with technology, everything kind of changes quite quickly. But a study in 2018 looked at technology use in autistic teenagers and found that a lot are using technology for entertainment purposes. So watching videos, 90%, looking things up on the internet, 87%, and playing video games, 81%. Ofcom have recently found that neurotypical 16 to 17-year-olds, 79% are using it for gaming. So not too dissimilar, but overall the statistics indicate that neurodivergent children are more likely to use technology for entertainment, whereas neurotypical children are more likely to use it for kind of communication. But obviously there will be individual differences. So technology can actually be really powerful and sometimes really helpful for neurodiverse children. And one thing to consider in this is that sensory predictability. So with technology, often those kind of sensory experiences can be a bit more controlled. So you kind of know what you're going into, you can click on things, whereas in real life, there can be lots of unexpected sounds, lots of smells that you wouldn't get using technology. So actually for some people with sensory sensitivities, using technology can be really helpful. And if you think about if you were going out to a new place or environment, if someone was to get completely overwhelmed and it was quite kind of overload sensory wise, they can't easily just exit. They may try and walk out, but it will take a while to get home to their kind of safe place. But if you're in some kind of virtual reality headset or system, you can actually just shut it off straight away. So it can be really helpful for people to feel like they kind of have a bit of control over some of those things. Also, it's important to consider that some people kind of get a lot of success from technology use. So it may be that technology is something that your child is really good at. It may be something they excel in. It may be that they're really good at the kind of online gaming or finding out information. And they may not get those experiences of success elsewhere, you know, in their everyday life at school. So this is a way to actually maybe build their self-esteem a little bit and experience that sense of success. Also, studies show that technology is actually often used to help people de-stress. So the study by Hedges that looked at children with autism found that listening to music was something that was kind of rated as something that's really helpful to de-stress. Playing games as well can be one. And used in a learning context. So we know that neurodivergent children may have some learning difficulties. It may be things like processing speed. There may be children with dyslexia, for example, where technology is actually really helpful. And it may be something that you weren't able to access when you were in school, but often it is really useful in a learning context to use the technology or use of the laptop. And the study by Hedges with autistic children actually found that they found it really helpful to stay organised using technology, using kind of online calendars and laptops. So actually technology can offer lots of opportunities for neurodiverse children and help them manage a world which can sometimes be quite overwhelming or disabling. So it can be really powerful, and you may kind of think about or relate to your child and whether any of these are applicable or what they find useful about technology. So thinking a little bit more around social media side of things, we've already spoken a little bit about the sensory needs, and an online world and social media can be more suitable for that, and also those communication needs as well. So we know that Some people will find things like reading body language really difficult, and you don't actually have that with the online world, talking on social media. So it's kind of one less thing that you have to make sense of. It also gives you a little bit more time to process things. When you're having a conversation, you don't necessarily on social media need to respond straight away, whereas in person there's that kind of expectation and pressure. Also, online interaction can be based on shared interests. So rather than that kind of general chit chat or small talk, which we know autistic children can find difficult, it's kind of based on shared interests. So if someone's really interested in Minecraft, for example, they can join a forum where everyone's talking about Minecraft, and that can be really interesting. So many autistic children and adults actually find that communicating online is less stressful and more enjoyable than talking in in-person social situations. And you can understand why, given what we're talking about. And the internet also helps neurodivergent children and their families feel less alone. So I don't know if this is one that you can relate to. Often on the internet, you will be able to find other neurodivergent children, families, kind of speak about their experiences, understand what's going on, and it's kind of building that community a little bit. So Autism Speaks has some information here about the kind of social media benefits for the autistic community. And following this, we've got a online project here. So this was done at Queen Mary University of London, and basically they interviewed some autistic adults around kind of social media and how they felt about it. So the green boxes are things which participants felt quite positive and really helpful. So keeping in contact without needing extensive interactions. So it's a way to keep up that communication without you having to kind of stay in that situation too long, for example. As we've said, kind of finding others with similar interests, being in special interest groups, being able to take time to process and step away from online interactions. And if someone's struggling to make sense of it, stepping away, asking someone else. So these are things that they said are positive. The orange box represents a bit of a mixed feeling. So people felt mixed on the use of emojis. Could be quite helpful to quickly summarize in a picture. But some people actually said that they themselves don't even know what emotion that they're feeling. How do they know what emoji is? There's also lots of different emojis. It's becoming a language in itself, which can be a bit confusing. So a bit of a mix on that. Some people did say as a negative, it can be difficulty learning the online social norms. So it's almost a new set of social norms to learn, kind of already potentially trying to make sense of those everyday in-person interactions and then trying to learn how it works on social media. And risk of sensory overwhelm. So although we said that is one thing that can be helpful about technology, some people actually said on certain platforms there were certain kind of videos and things that popped up without them realizing, so they just automatically play and the sound can be quite loud. So actually in some cases for some people it can cause a bit of overwhelm with that. So it's really interesting to kind of see the themes that are being pulled out, what's helpful and what's not. So we are thinking a little bit more about your own child now. So what are your main concerns about your child's social media use? And I know that there are some people who were slightly younger kids, and it may be that they're not kind of completely on social media yet, but perhaps people in their class are already talking about it and they probably already have an awareness of it. So even if they're not currently using it, kind of think about what would be your concern. So addiction, missing out on things, bullying, child safety, and safety is often a kind of huge concern for parents, understandably, around the online world. Bullying as well, so we know that bullying does happen through the internet. It's not just in person and at school. Time restraints, so a few comments around just spending too much time online, getting them to understand the rules around online, and I guess vulnerabilities, little control over the content of YouTube, safety language, and that's quite scary as a parent to kind of not have all of that control of what they're seeing. So thinking about safety again with things like grooming, thinking about kind of the risks or new relationships that they may be making online. And the content, mind-numbing content, so things that actually aren't that helpful for them. Setting up boundaries, and we will talk a little bit towards the end of this about setting up boundaries as a parent and what you can do as parents, falling into unsavory groups. Yeah, and I guess people have talked about that, spending a lot of time with it while they're not doing other things like going outside or sleeping or things like that. Not realizing that friends may not answer for many reasons, that can be really difficult. So not kind of really understanding the use of social media, and that people may not reply, and that can feel like a huge rejection for some young people, not understanding that. Using distraction, looking for birth families, so looking up things you may not be sure about. Really difficult to come off screen, and that is something that a lot of parents say, and how difficult it can be to get a young person off the screen, and that can often trigger kind of arguments and anger and things like that. So we will mention that as well. Yeah, sleep. I find the parent struggle of conforming is just as tricky as it is for kids. Yeah, not age appropriate, and it's really, really difficult when your child's saying that their friend is doing something that you wouldn't let your child do, and but that makes them feel a little bit left out. Yeah, age appropriate videos, addiction, no other way to be entertained. That may be kind of the key thing that young people may be using at the moment, and maybe their friends aren't even kind of suggesting going out, not knowing who they're talking to. Thank you. You can see that a lot of you are sharing very similar concerns, and it is concerns that we hear from parents all the time, and quite right, really. And these are the things that are kind of coming up in the media as well, the concerns that people are having. So thank you so much for listing some of those concerns. And on the screen is just some of the top rated concerns that parents have. So this is based on the Pew Research Centre 2023. So you can see that actually very linked to your comments there. So being exposed to explicit content that they shouldn't be seeing, wasting too much time on social media. So whether that means that they're not out playing with their friends or sleeping or doing homework or whatever it is they could be doing, spending time with family. Sharing too much about personal life was a bit of a concern. So not being aware of boundaries, perhaps in a way that they would be maybe face to face, but online they're kind of sharing lots of stuff, which may, which sometimes can be useful, but for some people may actually be a bit too much. Feeling pressured. I think lots of people talked about that kind of pressure to act in a certain way or do something or follow certain things. Being harassed or bullied by others, so lots of people commented on that. So cyberbullying, and the difficulties of controlling that, really. And also lots of parents do worry that it can cause problems of anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, and that's quite a complicated area, really, which I think we've got a slide about next, so we'll go on to that now. So the University of Oxford have conducted a research study on the use of technology and adolescent mental health. So it was a really large study, 300,000 teenagers and parents. And overall, they found a negative but very small association. So technology use was associated with poorer mental health. But the emphasis on this is it was a very small association. So explains 0.4% of adolescent mental health. And to put that into perspective, the study looked at other factors, and it also found that including potatoes in your diet also had a similar association with adolescent well-being. So essentially the conclusion from this is that there is no clear causal link between technology use and mental health. Very small associations, but we can't say that it can cause in and of itself mental health difficulties. However, this is a hugely growing area, and there aren't quite enough research studies on it at the moment. So the current select committee inquiry looking at the effects of screen time on education and well-being, and it is acknowledged that there's a lot of limitations with the current studies. So lots of them like this are looking at technology use in general rather than kind of particular activities that people are doing online and how that specifically may affect their well-being and education. So I guess this area is still a big question mark that we need to answer. And we know it's really important. So lots of studies kind of investigating this at the moment, but it is complicated, and it's not so straightforward to say that social media use leads to mental health problems on their own. So there is a lot on the internet around well-being, and actually surveys show that a lot of people use the internet to help them with their mental health and well-being. So in 2018, Hope Lab actually found that 87% of US teens go online for health information. And it was found that 90% of respondents with symptoms of depression go online for information about their mental health. So actually mental health is obviously a growing concern, and lots of people as their first point of call are turning towards the internet for help on that. And sometimes that can be helpful depending on the sources. A very recent study by Ofcom in 2024 found that 20 to 17-year-olds living with at least one limiting or impacting health condition rely on the internet or apps to support their well-being more than their counterparts. So that's 77% of those with a health condition versus 69%. So they're using the internet to help with their mood and get support. Lots of people kind of following TikTok accounts and things like that around well-being. But it can be used in a useful way, and the internet does have some kind of really well validated things out there. So there's a few apps up on this page which are used for mental health, which young people can find really helpful. So Catch It is an app to understand mood based on capturing emotions. Me Too is a safe and secure forum for teenagers to discuss issues affecting their lives. Think Ninja, so that's a slightly younger age range for young people 10 to 18 for health and well-being. Calm Harm is designed for self-harm. Combined Minds actually is for families and friends to support young people with their mental health. And there's also an app called Molehill Mountain, which is designed for autistic young people, and it's a cognitive behavioural therapy-based app, which is helpful for anxiety. So there's lots and lots of apps out there. And I would say if your child is interested in using this kind of thing, it can be helpful to download it yourself so you're kind of fully explored with it and familiarised yourself with it as well before recommending. So there are plenty of kind of really useful resources online for mental health and apps, but I guess it's just about finding what the right resource is, because as a lot of people have actually already put when we were talking about the negatives of technology, is that there's a lot of misinformation as well. So we do have to be careful with the sources that we access and helping support young people get the right sources as well. So just kind of continuing to think about those benefits and why people, young people, are using social media and technology, and particularly neurodiverse children. Also thinking about that kind of social connection. So we know that social connection and belonging is really important for everyone, all of us as human beings, particularly for young people at that age range. But also we know that studies show that neurodiverse children are actually more likely to say that they feel lonely compared to their neurotypical peers. So actually, social media may be a really nice way for them to connect with people. And I know at the start when we were talking about the benefits for yourselves, that's something that you often named for you. So it's a way to kind of connect with friends, again, in that kind of accessible way for them, meet new people and just get that sense of belonging that potentially they're not getting outside of the internet. Ofcom, again, recent study, teenagers feel more confident at communicating online rather than in person. So that is potentially kind of a reflection of the way that they've grown up, that in some ways they may be more used to this. And I guess we feel a bit beyond the COVID era now, but those few years in your child's development were also probably quite pivotal in terms of they reduce those everyday interactions, and actually we're getting more and more used to those online interactions. So that makes sense. Connect with networks and communities, and that can be particularly important for minority groups. The flip side is that minority groups are also more likely to experience that bullying online. But we know that kind of connecting in with those communities, and it may be kind of with those neurodiverse communities or others, can feel like really helpful and help build that sense of belonging, essentially, that we know is really important. People are also using it to kind of share concerns and offer advice and guidance to other people. And as with everything, it has two sides. That can be really helpful, can be unhelpful if the advice being given isn't particularly helpful for the young person. And actually, there's some recent research showing that there's been an increase in teenagers using dating apps. So that's quite interesting and useful to know. So they may be using it as a way to kind of have some of those romantic relationships as well. So just thinking about kind of neurodivergent identity, and actually a lot of people find that one of the benefits of using social media and looking things up online is discovering a bit more of their identity and their community online. And doing this may be particularly important if someone does live a little bit more rurally and doesn't have those kind of groups that they can access in person. And there's so much online around kind of neurodiversity, ADHD, autism, that people can kind of find more about it. They can kind of make sense of their world and really relate to people. And that can be really validating for them as well. Actually, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one that feels like this, experiences this, as we said, sharing ideas. So it can be really helpful for them gaining that identity. And there's around 20 billion views for ADHD and autism on TikTok. So lots of people accessing that content. There is some risk of self-diagnosis on the internet. So on platforms like TikTok, you do get some kind of videos that come up with, if you have these 5 things, you have autism, for example, which obviously is not kind of particularly accurate or helpful. But there is a kind of article there around that actually this kind of self-diagnosing using the internet is in the context of kind of long waiting lists for formal assessments of things like ADHD or autism. So people are turning to the internet. There's lots of advocates on social media for neurodiversity, and some people find this really positive, and BPS has kind of a list of neurodivergent social media advocates. Okay, we just wanted to kind of share with you some young people's views on social media. As I said, there are kind of generational differences in our use of technology and social media, and sometimes we have kind of our own way of viewing things, and that may be quite different to how your child views it. So it can be useful just to kind of think about it from their perspective. So this video was conducted in Thurston School with Dr. Beth Mosley, and it's just really interesting chat. So it's just about 3 minutes. And Beth, do let me know if you can't hear the sound. I did put share sound, so fingers crossed it'll work.
Pro social media person, because for me it's just a way that I can talk about my interests with people who will actually accept it. As I've kind of discovered, learned more about autism and how it affects me, even though I've had a diagnosis and kind of known about it for a long time, I found that when I was starting to stand up for rights and stuff like that, social media gave me a voice. It kind of encouraged me to start promoting autism acceptance and combating everyday ableism. And for me, the inspirational voices I've seen have inspired me to kind of go on and do my best.
I follow lots of celebrities. I follow a range of people from the school, but I also follow mental health charity organisations. So I think it's they can get there's people who will give you a negative outlook. There's also things that will give you a positive outlook. So it just depends on how you decide to use social media, whether it's to look at what your friends doing, see what the rest of the world is doing, or to just generally help you.
I have made very really good friends online.
Same.
Yeah, who have inspired me with and have gotten me into my hobbies. For example, I wouldn't be into art if it wasn't for one of my friends who had started drawing. I thought, oh, that's pretty cool, and I've just been progressively drawing since then. So not only have I got friends to turn to if I'm ever sad and can't talk to them and can't talk to people in general, but they also help build up my hobbies, and they make me feel you know, me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sometimes social media can be negative in the way that you can think, oh, I've got to be this person, I've got to be, you know, suit those expectations, but you don't. Like, everyone's different, everyone was made differently.
To every good thing, there's always a downside within social media. That's always going to have at least an issue that needs to be resolved, and whether that's a school issue, parental issue, or friend issue.
With me, I went on it so much that even when my parents didn't know, like, I would do it so secretly that I started getting addicted. And once they banned me from it, and now I can't get any apps at all, I would re-download it secretly, and I would like secretly go on it because I couldn't stay away from it. You would always get messages from random strangers saying, hey, how you doing? You're really nice looking and stuff. And I get a lot of people, I used to get a lot of people messaging me, and like complete strangers, like 21-year-olds, like 30-year-olds just messaging me. My parents just started having enough, and so I think...
What's life like now without it? On the ban, how are you managing?
I'm struggling, really struggling. Like, at times I really want to go on it, and I really want to message my friends that I had on there, because it was like they were my coping method for the real world.
Yes.
There's a big difference between living in a rural area like Suffolk compared to a big city, because in a big city you may not actually need social media to connect with people because you live so compact, you live so close to other people. You don't have that freedom of just walking outside and having people to talk to.
Okay, sorry, that screen was a little bit small. I hope that was okay for everyone, but really interesting to kind of see the variety of responses and the kind of advantages and disadvantages that people find, and there really is a mix.
And I was just thinking there as well that there's a lot that was at a secondary school. A couple of years ago that was recorded, and I do wonder if you did the same task with primary school children, just holding in mind the number of parents who are on this workshop whose children are aged between 6 and 10, with the increase of young people under 10 having access to smartphones or spending more time on their screens. It would be really interesting to have those conversations with those primary school students who obviously a different stage of their development. So yeah, thank you, Hope. That's really great.
Okay, so yeah, we'll be moving on to Beth to do the second half. Thanks, Beth.
And just another point, really, I was thinking about what one of the students said about enabling her to become more active in that space and advocate for autistic young people. One of the things that came up we're doing this at the perfect time because we've got all the latest research which has all been published in the last month in the Ofcom survey, is that young people are increasingly over time believing that people can and should say what they want online, even if it upsets or offends others. I just think that's a really interesting observation, that even though for some young people that's going to potentially be harmful to them or feel not so positive, there is a growing trend, and I think we're seeing this in our more broadly in society, that having the opportunity to air your opinion, even if it isn't liked by others, is becoming more important than not. Okay, so I'm going to focus. We've talked a lot about the value and positives, particularly from the perspective of young people as well as the research. Now we're going to focus on the risks and problems with social media. And that isn't to try and get us into a bit of a dichotomy of it's either good or it's bad, but I think it's to help us work out how do we get the balance here. So we're going to cover some of the risks and problems which are particularly relevant to social media, but I would say are also relevant to most technology. So we're going to think about co-rumination. We're going to go on to think about online vulnerability and abuse, exposure to harmful content. We're not going to go into any detail on body image concerns, but we're then going to move on to think about what you can do as parents to help balance the risks and benefits. I think it's also important to just highlight as well, and it was in the papers yesterday, that we in the UK we've just signed off the Online Safety Act, which is hopefully going to lead the world in the direction of making tech companies more responsible for these issues that we're going to go on to discuss now. The rules are not enforced until early next year, so it's all in, it's been pulled together, and it will involve things like tougher age verification. So if people want to get onto social media apps, they'll have to have facial recognition or photo ID. And at the moment, what we know is that the age requirement for most of those social media platforms like TikTok, I think even Snapchat, is around the age 13. But the research, the survey evidence shows us that despite that, most young people under the age of 10 are accessing social media sites. And if they're not accessing it under fake accounts that they've created, then they're accessing it under other family members' accounts. So there will be tougher age verification being brought in, and there will also be the tech companies will not be able to use their algorithms as aggressively to push content towards young people. And there's various other things. So I just think it's important to name that now, that there are some rules coming in which will lead to more accountability for those tech companies, but they're not going to come until next year. So it's important to think about what you can do as a parent to protect your young person in the meantime. So co-rumination, what we discovered in the pandemic was actually that boys did better than girls in the pandemic. And there's some theories around the fact that boys used gaming and typically to manage some of the time that they had without being able to do their usual activities, whereas girls tended to use small group chats where they would get into a place of co-rumination. So what we mean by co-rumination is sharing distress with another young person, and then that other young person, rather than soothing that distress, adding to it, and then the group building on their distress and getting more concerned and more anxious, and that leading to people feeling worse in those interactions rather than better. So this kind of escalation of distress, or potentially leading to unhelpful action. So I'm sure if you've got a teenager in your life, you will have seen this happen in front of you through a Snapchat conversation, where people start group chats where they start escalating things. So and so did this, so and so did that. Well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to post that. So I think you can see how quickly those things can go from being quite standard events to suddenly being a big crisis, and potentially within that forum a person or a group of people is going to be feeling really targeted or potentially bullied, or really worried about the actions in that group, or just feel left out. So we also know that with online, it's really easy to access unhealthy strategies to cope with distress, and that can lead to young people very easily getting information they wouldn't have otherwise had on things like self-harm and body image. And we are going to discuss that in a little bit more detail in a few slides on. And again, there's this pursuit of perfection. So the compare and despair, where you'll know, and I think you put it in your earlier slides, you know, sometimes it's just everything's too perfect in other people's lives, or, you know, the news feed that you're getting is all about the disasters in the world. So we seem to, as society, being pushed to these two extremes. The challenge is the motto really is people will be much more engaged with content if they're enraged. So in order to capture attention, you know, whether you're someone posting on Instagram or you're a news agency, you need to make a headline that's going to grab people's attention. And the challenge is that the more people and the more information there is out there, the harder it is to grab attention. So you can see this pull towards young people having to do posts which are more shocking or more revealing, you know, a perfect person. So and of course we've got the use of filters, not just filters that young people can use to or anyone can use to enhance how they look and their face, but also their body. So some of the filters they can use can make them have smaller waists, bigger bums. And of course, we know that young people struggling now to work out what's real and what's fake, because so much of that is becoming so sophisticated. So if you're a young person, and particularly if you're a neurodivergent young person who may struggle with self-regulation, or may struggle with having more control over your own emotions, you may therefore find that these issues have a bigger impact, have a bigger pull. And you may also end up relying more on your phone to help soothe and regulate you. And then when you're exposed to these kind of extremes, that can potentially lead to feeling quite confused, or pushing you down one route or the other. So I think that's one of the challenges, and I'm sure you will have experienced this yourself. You might have been feeling fine, you pick up your phone, something happens on a post, or you watch a feed, and all of a sudden you're feeling yourself starting to get anxious or worried about something. You might make a contribution to that story, and then somebody has a comment in response to that, which might further upset or enrage you, and you can get stuck in a cycle of, like, a dynamic which can feel really upsetting. If you hadn't had exposure to that in the first instance, you'd have probably just gone and made yourself a cup of tea and done something else. And I think that's the challenge. You so easily can go from being in your normal world to in a really dysregulated state of rage and anger based on something that you've seen. And of course, that's going to be true for young people even more so, because they're not going to necessarily have so many skills around self-regulation. I've got to watch time because I'm notoriously overtalk. And I think when you put your comments about what you were worried about and what we know other parents are worried about, this online vulnerability is absolutely up there. And we know from the research that there is out there and the surveys that have been completed that neurodivergent young people may have difficulty understanding safe online interactions. They may miss some of the social nuances. They may not be able to work out whether somebody is the person they are saying they are. And so they might miss some of those more subtle cues that neurotypical children may be more naturally able to do. We know that research shows autistic children are more vulnerable to online coercion and abuse than neurotypical peers, and that children with additional needs may be more susceptible to online harms. And again, just literally last month, they've been discussing this in Westminster, and the evidence from Barnardo's suggests that children with additional needs, and that's quite a broad category, but we're assuming that neurodiverse young people are in that category, are more susceptible to online harms. And the thinking behind that is because they do have an increased use of online compared to neurotypical children. They might have a decreased ability to approach and interact with social media in a self-protective way. And I know when I see my adolescent teen online who is fairly neurotypical, I can see the level of savviness and hardness and brutality she has to employ to be able to engage online and not get too distressed by some of the things that she sees. But for a young person who might not have that ability to be so detached or have that savviness, that could expose them to using the online world in a slightly different way. And also, as Met was hinted and alluded to by Hope earlier on, because a neurodiverse young person may experience increased isolation from family and friends, potentially because of some of the challenges around developing relationships and feeling understood by others, that inability to maintain and develop some offline relationships may make them more dependent on online relationships. And that's where you can see the neurodivergent young people speaking in that clip I found people that inspired me, that I found people I could relate to, I found people I could connect to. So for a neurodivergent young person who finds that community can be life-changing, and I know that from working with many neurodivergent young people who had a special interest and they felt so isolated in that. And I think it's a really good point that that young person says about living in rural communities where you don't necessarily have access to clubs or settings where some of your special interests might have another group of people taking part in those. That opportunity to be in that online space makes such a difference to that young person. But it's really finding that balance of how do they do that in a way that's safe for them. And I just think the other thing to highlight is that in the Ofcom report that's again just being published, young people with an impacting condition were more likely than average to experience unwanted types of online content, including being asked to share naked or half-dressed photos or videos of themselves. And we are going to talk about sextortion briefly in a bit. So, and I think it's quite hard to talk about this stuff, but we really need to, because our young people will be exposed to it, and they will often be having conversations about it in their peer group. So it's a tricky, difficult topic for us, and it's something that we probably need to build our understanding up around so we can feel more confident to have these helpful conversations with our children. So cyberbullying. We know that neurodivergent children are particularly at risk of cyberbullying, and this has a higher impact because you really can't escape, because if you've got your device on you, it's in your home. It might be something that you're spending a lot of time on, and those things will keep popping up and you won't necessarily be able to control them. And we know that bullying has a huge impact on young people, not just in the moment, but also in the future. It has a really big impact on the ability to trust and develop relationships. And what we really want to make sure is that we provide we as adults provide a safe space for our children to come and be able to talk to us about that, rather than becoming more isolated with it, or even turning to the online world to support for that without letting any adults in their lives know. And again, I think schools are having to really work hard on this, because things that are happening outside of school, on group chats, on social media, they're having to pick up in the school context and then hold young people to account when they come back into school. And again, that's a real challenge for some young people, because they don't want to tell their parents, because they don't want school to necessarily do anything about it, because they're anxious that school will make it worse for them. So I think this is a really, really challenging, complex area for young people and parents to manage. But I think also it's important to highlight that online bullying very rarely happens completely in isolation. If a young person is being bullied in person, they're also more likely to be being bullied online. And actually, when they looked at this in the National Behaviour Study, which was done in April 2024, only 7% of children who were in school were only being bullied online. 67% of young people had experienced bullying in person, and 23% both online and in person. So in-person bullying is still the most likely way that a young person will be bullied. And if they're being bullied in person, they may also be bullied online, but it will be unlikely that they will just be being bullied online. So I just think that's helpful to hold in mind, because sometimes I think we can have a view that cyberbullying is going to be the most prolific thing. So yes. We are not going to talk to body image concerns, because we've covered this in much more detail in our parent workshop, which is online, and you can watch this section of it, and we just didn't have quite enough time. But as you can imagine, there is some research in this area just really identifying that some of the projection of particularly desirable body types constantly be exposed to young people on social media feeds can have an impact on young people's own views of their own bodies. Now, I think this is something that all of you will be worried about, is your child unwittingly being exposed to harmful content, or to be honest, even having the capacity to search for something and find it. and then not knowing whether your child has seen something or not. And I am going to give you some stats which are going to kind of probably shock and scare you a little bit. But I think hopefully not to be in a place where you're going to say, I'm never going to let my child go online again, but really just in a way to say, actually, I need to really think about parental controls. One of the things that has been discovered most recently with the research is that parents over time are becoming more worried about their child's access to the online world, but they're actually doing less about it. And I think that's because there's a kind of acceptance that the genie's out of the bottle, feeling really helpless, feeling like a parent said, you know, all the other friends at school are playing Fortnite, and I don't want my child to play that, but I'm getting put under this social pressure for my child to have that opportunity to be in their friendship group. So parents are feeling more helpless and they're doing less about it, but the risks are still there. So the reason I'm telling you about this is because you need to know this stuff, because your child will probably be exposed to this stuff in a way that you might not be. And then you can do something about it, not just in how you're using your kind of router at home or how you might be using apps that can support you with this, but also in terms of helping you have conversations with your child that would give them the opportunity to potentially let you know if they're struggling. So in terms of harmful content, we know that pornography is a real challenge, and violence, and that there are more and more young people who are sharing images through sexting, which then they share it with someone consensually, and then it gets shared beyond that. So half of children aged 13 have seen serious porn online, and about 25% had seen that at the ages of 8 or 9. And it's not necessarily because children are searching for that, it's because it's popping up on their feed. And I did have a conversation with my 11-year about this yesterday, and he said, well, when things pop up like that, I just skip it. But he didn't deny that it hadn't popped up on his feed for him. Also, we know that there is many more self-generated images being made of young people taking photos of themselves and sharing them. And we know about 90% of girls, I think by the time they get to 18, at some point have received an unsolicited indecent image sent to them by boys. So we know that that's on the rise. And if you think about how easy it is for a young person, a teenager, to do that, press send and then think, oh no, that's a real challenge. We also know that it's easy to get content which could expose young people to methods of self-harm, and there is a social contagion and triggering element to this, and there's been things in the media about this in the past. We also know that there's been quite a lot of radicalization online, far-right views, and a misogyny trend. So you'll all probably be familiar with the name Andrew Tate, and that led to a really big increase of boys in schools behaving in misogynistic ways towards girls, and schools have had to really address this trend. So there is that kind of additional feed of information, and when you look at some of the literature about how boys are reading this, some of it makes sense to them and some of it makes sense of their experiences and how they're feeling about being boys or men, but not all of it. But they can often get caught up with some of the language or viewpoints because it's on trend, and that's the social element of the group dynamic. We also know that young people may use social media to self-soothe and escape difficult feelings, which can sometimes be helpful. But obviously, if you're going into social media with that being the intention, that's where you're actually more likely to come across some of that harmful content. And the other really important thing to note is that children prefer to turn to the online world to resolve issues. So they want, like we saw the stats earlier, so many young people will go online to find out about a health issue or a mental health issue, or search up depression. Or I think there's 20 billion searches for ADHD, 20 billion searches for autism. So young people will use that as their way to find out about something. And again, depending on what comes up, will determine what their knowledge and understanding might be, and how they might resolve some of those issues, or potentially develop ways of coping with some of the things that they're worried about. So this is the next bit, which we're going to really think about, well, what do we do about this as parents? Because you've already come on this workshop because that's what you're worried about. So if you were worried about it at the beginning, you might be more worried about it now. I think the really important thing is these stats here. So if young people have encountered some kind of worrying or nasty online content, then 91% of them will talk to somebody about it if they're aged between 8 to 11. 82% if they're 12 to 15, and 79% of 16 to 17-year-olds. Now, I think that's quite impressive figures, that there are many young people who will talk about it. They'll talk about it with their parent, most likely. They'll talk about it with someone at school, and the older year groups will talk about it with their peer group and their friends. So we're going to go on to the next slide, which is what you can do about it as parents or carers. I think a really important thing is it's easy to get into the trap of demonizing the online world, especially when you feel quite anxious about it yourself and you can see the possible dangers. But what we know is from speaking with young people, is that young people are very clear that they love their online experience. And they also recognize that they are addicted to it, and they don't want these gadgets to be taken away or this availability taken away, but they do want boundaries. And actually, they're saying to parents when they're sitting down and talking with a non-parent, please be curious about our online world. Please be willing to talk with us about some of the difficult stuff we've maybe been seeing. Ask us about it, but don't ask us about it and then run out of the room embarrassed. Ask us about it and then talk to us about it in a kind of available and curious and non-judgmental way. And please give us boundaries, because we can't manage this on our own. So what we're going to be thinking about are these 4 things. How can you be more available and curious about your child's online world, especially if you know, it's harder for parents who maybe really don't like it. How do we give our young people advice that feels valuable and not just advice that they want to, you know, not listen to? How do we protect non-digital time, and how do we model it? So the UK Chief Medical Officer has provided a common sense approach from looking at all of the research, and this is the slide for that. And Happy Families has a chapter in chapter 3, also provides a whole chapter on how to create the balance of using screens appropriately when they can be helpful, but also maintaining those key things that we know are really important for our well-being and our learning and for young people's development. So things like sleep, making sure that exercise and activity is still happening, making sure that we communicate outside of screens, and making sure that we're kind of using these as tools for learning, but not just learning about topics, but also learning about online safety. So if we think about availability and curiosity, how do we maintain that as parents? So there's something about being available. There's something about showing an interest in what your child is doing online. So my question to families is, do you know what your child is doing online? Do you show an interest in it? Do you let them show you, and do you sit next to them and experience their online world? And of course, this is much easier when young people are under 10. It becomes much more difficult when we have teenagers. But in my experience, actually, if you show real interest in TikTok or some of the trends, then you might find that your adolescent will actually want to show you their world and show you the things that they're doing on it. And I think the key is to show a non-judgmental interest, because if you're coming from a position of, you know, I'm not sure if I'm going to approve of this, then your child or adolescent is going to probably be a bit more resistant to showing you freely what's going on in their world. So coming alongside, sitting with, and there's so much learning you can potentially do, because this generation is described as digital natives. So quite often they are kind of seeing the world from a different lens to us, and there's things that they can teach us. So you kind of hold that judgment, that criticism back, because that often makes young people shut down, and makes it less likely that they're going to talk about some of the challenges that they might be experiencing, because their anxiety will be that you will be taking away their device. And so that kind of push and pull for them will be alleviated by feeling like you can have balanced conversations, and you can maintain a degree of empathy around how much they value their online world. And then you can create space for healthy discussions. Car journeys are great for that, or just opportunities throughout the day where you're feeling well resourced and your child isn't preoccupied or distracted by something else. Ideally, don't have your gadget right in front of you, but those spaces can actually help you have discussions. And teenagers in particular, there's really lots of interesting issues that are being debated on their online world, and actually being interested in their opinion and their view can actually be really refreshing for them, because adolescents do like to be in an expert position and they like their views to be respected. So it is actually an opportunity for connection with your adolescent or your young person potentially. In terms of giving advice to your team, I think what you can talk about is notice how the information that's pushed at your child or teenager affects them. So getting more observant. I've been scrolling on this feed and actually it's making me feel really crap. I need to intentionally move away from that and do something else. In the Ofcom report, more and more young people are having an understanding about algorithms and advertising, but a lot of young people don't understand that what their influencers are telling them is brilliant is because they're being paid to do that. So just making sure that there is a degree of opportunity to educate about algorithms. Some young people have reported they didn't really understand that if they research for if they look at a particular content, then the algorithm is going to push more of that content their way. So we often say to young people is try and look for more positive things. So if you have had a spate of looking at things that are more negative, try and then just do some things on there which are more positive, and then your feed will shift to essentially giving you more positive content. And again, that's self-care. So learning what are the apps that I know I can trust and rely on, and they may come from one of those apps earlier on, that I know I can do something that's going to help me feel better, that's going to down regulate me if I've got really stressed about something. Is there some relaxing meditation or music I can listen to? And lots of young people are turning to apps to do exactly that. And also when to have a break or to speak to someone. And I think we're going to talk about boundaries now. Oh, before we talk about boundaries, we're going to talk about how to respond. So what you can do as a parent, because I think the challenges, and this was identified, is that our children are ahead of us on this stuff. So if we're going to have these meaningful and helpful conversations, we need to kind of get ourselves knowledgeable about this stuff so that it doesn't feel completely overwhelming to us. So thinking about how they can then be in a place to turn to us when something's gone wrong on social media and they're having a problem with their friendship group, they're more likely to have those conversations with you than rely on the online world to sort of get that advice. So just really understanding that, the landscape of sexting is so important, because I think that is something that's so likely to be in your teenagers' experience, then having a sense of being able to talk about that, so that if they get into a difficult situation around that, they can trust you to have a conversation without you completely kind of becoming overwhelmed with the distress about that, will mean that your child is more likely to turn to you than maybe the online world to solve the problem, or just hold on and not get that support and help. Again, really having those having that advice and guidance and knowledge about suicide prevention. Papyrus have a great pack on that for parents, which is all about how to have those sorts of conversations with your child. So if you're worried about that, you've got the language, the tips on how to have those conversations. There's a really great website called Common Sense Media, which is all about how to educate you as parents and look at things that are going to be better for young people and not so good for young people. Also, this is a really important thing to know about. NCMEC is Take It Down. So basically, it's an important thing for teenagers, particularly, to know that if they have shared an image of themselves that they no longer want to be out there, they can essentially go on to this website called Take It Down, and they can anonymously post that image so that it protects it from ever being shared on other platforms. And there's also the NCPCC report remove. And these things for a young person who might have ended up in this scenario could be life-changing, because it means that they've got a way of protecting that thing that they've maybe made a mistake around. So knowing about these things can make a huge difference. And again, using your tech tools to create more parental controls, use more parental controls at home. What the Ofcom report was saying is most parents don't use the parental controls on their modems because they would prefer to rely on their kids to be able to self-regulate. But what we know is, and what you should know from what I've said, is that they are being presented with information they haven't looked for, and that's very difficult to unsee some of the things that they might see. So using those parental controls is something that's very helpful, particularly before that Online Safety Act comes into place. Right, just a few more slides. Talk too much. We're going to run over time, I'm afraid. So how much control do you feel like you have over your child's social media screen use? And for those of you who have to leave now, you will get the full recording, so you can come back and watch this bit onwards. So some of you feel like you've got a lot of control, which is amazing. I know as a parent of a teenager, I feel like I've got very little control. But when my children were younger, I did feel like I had more control. Okay, that's really interesting. So we go on to the next slide. Hope. So how do we protect non-digital time? How do we create those boundaries? And what everybody mentioned earlier was the addictive element. And you'll know that for yourself, because you will be likely someone who at some point or another has spent too much time on your phone, more time than you wanted to. And again, we haven't got time to go into it now, but there's in Happy Families chapter 3, there's quite a lot of information about the impact of online use on dopamine, which is the feel-good chemical, and how when young people come off of their gadget or the thing that's helping produce all of this dopamine, they have this dopamine crash. And in those moments or minutes, or for some young people, it can be longer, they have that real withdrawal, like a withdrawal from a drug, where they'll be angry and they'll be raging and they'll be moody and they'll be cross. And if anyone here has had to take their kids off screens to take them out for the day, and they've spent the first 2 hours just in a mood about the fact that you've taken them off of their device, that is the dopamine crash. Because essentially, because the gadgets have been producing dopamine for helping their brains produce dopamine, your body stops producing dopamine. And in that gap, you have to go through this period of time where you don't have that dopamine in your system, which is what makes you feel so miserable and makes some young people have a really big explosive reaction when you take them off their device, or they come off. And then your body basically, once it goes into dopamine deficit, it then takes a bit of time before it starts producing its own dopamine again, which is kind of similar to what happens when you have a hangover. So that feeling that young people have, I explain it to my children. You are going to feel terrible for however long, but not being on the screen will help you move to a place where you will feel okay and normal again. And actually what I've learned to do is not do anything major, or not do any lecturing in that dopamine crash time, because that tends to be the time as a parent you're like, this is exactly why you shouldn't be on screens, and now you're going to be, I'm not letting you back on your Xbox till tomorrow or next week or whatever it might be. And of course, in that dopamine deficit, your child is even more likely to kind of explode. So I always reserve those conversations for once they've come out of that dopamine crash. So I really think about protecting non-digital time. Some of the key things to protect are sleep. Meal times we know are really important to protect, and how much physical activity our children may or may not be accessing because they're spending so much more time in front of their screens. Now, that's much more difficult to do in the winter, but now the summer is out, there are more opportunities for our children to play outside with others. And so going back to the dopamine crash, giving our children ample warning to get off their devices. If you've ever kind of been fed up of shouting, come on, dinner's ready, and you go up and turn that device off, you get that massive dopamine crash explosion. And for neurodivergent children, transitions can be really challenging. So that transition can be particularly difficult. So thinking about how you might agree that with your child when they're not on a device and they've not just come off a device, we're going to set a timer, or I'm going to give you 10 minutes warning, or I need to, for Fortnite, if your child plays Fortnite, when they're in a game, until they finish that game, their ranking might be affected by coming off. So I've had to have those conversations. Well, dinner is going to be ready at 6 o'clock. So do not enter into a game if you don't think you can finish it, because otherwise what happens is you just end up with this massive battle. So finding good times to have conversations to kind of come up with a contract of what will work best to avoid those more difficult explosive times, particularly with teenagers who are much more likely to push back on you imposing boundaries, is a really helpful way of doing that. Having opportunities to have shared social activities online. That could just be watching TV with your child, and that's an opportunity to kind of teach emotional regulation skills, to think about what's going on in the characters in the film and the emotional reaction that might be creating for them. So I think watching TV together is an old-fashioned thing that we used to do, but it's something to still find time for if you can, rather than everybody sitting on their separate devices watching something separate. And actually watching something your child is really interested and into, again, is an opportunity to be in their world and create more opportunities for connection and understanding what they're passionate about. So creating family house rules or structures that everyone has to follow, again, is a really helpful way of, which you have to follow as an adult too, is a really helpful way of creating routines and predictability and minimum expectations. When you first bring those in, there can be a bit of pushback. But once the family settles into those routines and you stick to them, you find that people generally will follow. And I think it's important to say that for some young people, particularly young people who might struggle to regulate themselves, or those more high stress games like Fortnite can be too difficult for some young people to manage, and they might be better off playing a game like Roblox, and that can be a really difficult conversation to have with a neurodivergent teenager who wants to play Fortnite with their friends but ends up in a real state, in a real pickle. And there's something about helping them map the impact of playing Fortnite for them and their family compared to another alternative game like Roblox. And actually, you might have to just impose that boundary for some young people, that they're developmentally not ready for those more extreme games. And that might be a really hard thing to enforce as your child gets older. But I think it's important to teach them to understand why those games are so much more difficult to manage, because of the sensory overload and that kind of hyper focus. So neurodivergent young people may need firmer boundaries and clearer boundaries because of that tendency for hyper focus or having an obsessional interest. But again, there's a positive here, because you can use online interests to support doing activities offline. So if you're into football, doing football outside in the garden. If you're into anime, turn that into anime. That way you can do some drawing and artwork. So the next one is modeling. So I think this is really an important one and a difficult one. Modeling how much are you using your phones and social media and technology, because our children, I mean, my kids say to me all the time, you're telling me to get off my phone, Mum, you're permanently on your phone. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm doing emails, I'm checking in with my mom. You know, I feel like somehow all the things I'm doing on my phone is so much more important and valid than what my children are doing on their phones. And they're like, yeah, but we're doing the same, we're doing schoolwork, we're checking in with our friends. So you can kind of see how your own use you know, is what your children are potentially going to also take from what the expectation is within your family home. So teaching them through showing rather than telling is much more effective. And also this is massively true for me as a parent. You know, does technology get in the way of my availability for a young person? I mean, yesterday, actually, my daughter was trying to tell me something really important about what had happened at school. And I was right in the middle of doing something online. And she was like, Mum, will you just put your phone down and listen to me? This is really important. And I was like, yeah, but I'm right in the middle of, and it was like, actually, no, my daughter's right. I probably do need to connect with her. But I had to say to her, I need to finish this important email. As soon as I've done that, I'll put my phone down and give you my full attention. So there's something about getting the balance there. But what we know is with the research is that teens who had higher rates of negative health or mental health outcomes had parents who spent a lot more time on social media and also were less likely to have conversations with their children around social media or technology use. So what you can do to create rules and boundaries to help yourself with technology, and doing that yourself will inadvertently have a positive impact on your child or children. Okay, so last question on this, and then we're going to move to a summary, and then are just finding out about your confidence and knowledge. What could you do differently with how you use devices and social media? So from what you've heard today, what do you think you as a parent and it's some of you I appreciate don't use social media at the moment, and I think that can make it actually harder to have conversations with our teenagers sometimes because we don't get it, we don't understand why they're so addicted to it. And I certainly had that experience. I used to hate TikTok, and I got to know it a bit better, and then I was able to have more empathic conversations with my teenager. So setting limits for yourself. So this is developing more self-control, and I've done an awful lot of research in this area and listened to a lot of people, and there's something about intentionality, that the phone is so powerful, it's such a powerful draw that we have to be really intentional about when we do and don't use it. It's hard work, it's not easy to put our phone down. That's great. So I joined my children in a household no tech week. Wow, it's hard for me too. They're now far more restricted, and I'm doing it too. So yeah, and I think I'm having to do things like leave my phone in the kitchen when I watch some TV with my 11-year-old, so I just don't get pulled into just doing one quick message. Stick to the routine you have in place. Create a fun list of dopamine interest increasing activities that aren't tech for our family. Yeah, absolutely. Showing our children that they can have fun outside of the online world is really important. Showing that interest, I think, is really key, and it's really difficult. With a teenage daughter, I had my son's 19 now. He was interested in gaming. He had no interest in social media, and I was just getting into all these negative discussions with my daughter, and I had to sit back, find out a bit more about her world, take an interest in it, and now we actually have really great conversations about it. Great, really lovely to see so deadlines for yourself. Yep. And you know, our phones tell us about how much screen time we're using and the type of things we're doing. We can track that, we can watch that, because the reason the research is so unreliable is because they're relying on people putting down how much time they think they spend on screen, and actually people are very inaccurate with how that self kind of saying how long they've been using the screens for. A dopamine day too, brilliant. And that's great for teenagers as well, finding out, because teenagers can get you out of your comfort zone. If I go down the gym with my daughter, she's making me do jump boxes, she's making me do much more exciting and interesting things and getting me out of my comfort zone. So there are some things that we can help use our adolescents' desire for dopamine activity to kind of give us a bit of excitement as well. Okay, Thank you so much. Let's move to the last slide and then we'll just do our final share our resources. So really, we know more and more people from younger ages are accessing social media and technology. It's very much a part of life across the world. We know there are benefits and drawbacks for everyone, but there are some particular benefits and drawbacks for neurodivergent children. We know that there are increased vulnerabilities in this area, and it's thinking about how we can protect ourselves and our young people in this area. And we as parents can really play a very important role. We know tech companies need to take more responsibility for this, and there is some limitations around that, but there are things that we can do to help our children get that balance, and not just our children but ourselves as well. So there's a resource page for you. You'll get all of this in our recording, and you can click on all of the links. We've got other free workshops that you can access as well. And there's another more general one on our technology, which has a specific emphasis on body image, which might be helpful for some of you.